Welcome back to our 40-Minute Mentor, Where Are They Now feature series, in which we catch up with some of our most popular 40-minute mentors from previous series. Kicking off this one, I'm joined by Dr. Anne-Marie Imafidon, MBE, co-founder and CEO of Stemettes, arithmetician on the popular Channel 4 TV show Countdown, and a published author. Anne-Marie previously joined us on Series 5 when we spoke about her upbringing, what it was like to be a real-life child prodigy, and her journey as a founder, growing Stemettes from a side hustle to the successful company it is today. I am so grateful to manage to get a slot in Anne-Marie's very busy diary to catch up again and find out more about what she's been up to and her brand new book, She's in Control. So, Anne-Marie, welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me back, James. I feel like this is All-Stars season.
Yeah, well, you are an all-star. I actually have mentioned, I think, in a live conference that your episode is one of my all-time favorites. It left a lasting impression. So I'm really, really thrilled to get you back on and chat all about what you've been up to. And I know you've been busy. I know you've been flying around the world, doing lots of things. So fill us in on what's new. And yeah, particularly your book, She's in Control. What's it all about? Who's it for? Fill us in.
Yeah, so there's a new book since the last time we spoke. I'm also now president of the British Science Association, which means all manner of different extra bits of work on my plate. But yeah, the book is a biggie. It was released on the 8th of September, which is an interesting date, I guess, to have chosen in the last however many decades of any kind of news happening in the world. I think folks will remember what else happened on the 8th of September. But it's a look at past, present, and future, really, of tech, the tech industry and STEM itself, but even more so women in tech, which is the she in the title. It is, as you said, called She's in Control, but the control is the CTRL as per the keyboard. But yeah, really excited to have been able to put this together and release it out to the world, release it out to the wild, and being able to kind of help folks really on that technical journey, help them step into their own technical prowess, help them, gain some agency back from digital literacy, and share some really practical tips and tricks and activities for folks to do on that journey.
That's amazing. No, well, congratulations. I know these things are labors of love and take a while to kind of come together, and it must be a very proud moment to get it out into the world. What was it like for you sort of switching from the sort of day job to writing a book like this? And were there any aspects of that process that surprised you, or any particular bits of advice for anyone that's kind of being inspired by hearing this, that they maybe have been sitting on an idea for a while, and encouragement to get out there and do it?
I mean, it was definitely a switch. I think the interesting one is I was writing it in amongst as well some of the filming for Countdown. So I think that was a bigger switch. Doing those maths questions, doing that quick arithmetic in 30 seconds was a bigger switch than, talking about this topic that I get to talk about quite a lot, getting it written, interviewing folks as well. So it was a little bit of a switch. There were definitely, a couple of weeks during that writing process where I had to be like, hey folks, I'm going to be offline because I need to just, bed down. I need to, plan this out, or I need to think about, the flow and the narrative and the order, or I need to be interviewing folks. So there were a couple of kind of peaks, I'd say, of activity alongside some troughs, but I did it alongside everything else. Me from last time, I like to have my fingers in lots of different pies and be doing lots of things at the same time. And so it definitely was just another thing that kind of slotted in alongside it. I think at one point it was like every Tuesday morning and Thursday afternoon was like book time, where it was like a deep focus time where it's like everything switched off and I just have to, sit in the room and talk to myself as I try and pull the book together. So I think for me, that was what the experience was. I think the things that maybe have been the most surprising, I think there's definitely something of, everyone said from the beginning, whatever you write first, they're going to edit. It's not going to be what's there at the end. And I think the gap and the difference and the distance and the delta between what I submitted, I have to say what I submitted a week or two early, and what is now been printed, it's so different. I mean, my publisher, my editor kind of completely cut and chopped and changed, and it's one of those things where I'm a bit of a funny person, right? And so I'd written jokes in, and normally you need the punchline at the end rather than the beginning. And so there was some chopping and changing that meant that the punchline came first, and it was like, no, this is going to slightly ruin the whole joke, and now we have to remove the joke, and the book's not as funny as I am. But I think for me, that was really surprising, just to see how someone else had organized my thoughts and could organize my thoughts for something like a book, But I think my advice really would be, make sure that you have A, got the time to write it, but B, got the time to talk about it. And I think this is something I'm still learning, and it's a 2-book deal, so there will be a second book, but you spend as much time writing the book. In fact, you'd probably spend more talking about the book and making sure that people are able to benefit from it. And so that's definitely been something that's been a learning, that it's not just about the book, but it's about, what are you able to do with it, and what effort can you do to ensuring that it's useful for people, right? And it's in the hands of the people that will find it useful.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. And we've had Helen Tupper from the Squiggly Careers podcast came on, and we were talking when I last got up with her. She was saying how amazing it is to get out there and promote a book, but it's like a full-time job, isn't it? Getting out there and talking about it and promoting it. And it's not just promoting it for the sake of it. It's also just kind of the educational piece, the important educational piece that comes with it. So I'm hoping this can be part of that tour of duty to kind of get it out into the world, and I hope lots of people will go pick up a copy, as they should. I know that She's in Control is filled with inspiring stories of women in tech. You're a great advocate for that, and a brilliant example to all of us. Can you share a couple of those stories that you highlighted in the book? Like, what were some favorite ones for you, and why did they stand out to you and to our listeners?
So this has been a really tough question to answer. It's like saying, who's your favorite child, right? You don't really have a favorite. You're not supposed to have favorites, at least, and even more so not to say it out loud. But I think for me, there's more than 15 different people that are featured, not all of them women actually, but a lot of stories that are told. And I think for me, it's the diversity of stories. And we talk about diversity quite a lot, right? And especially in this space, it's, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's age and all the rest of it. But I think for me, it's also been, in addition to that, the diversity of pathways. And for me, it was really important to feature that in the book. Everyone's like, oh, Anne-Marie, we want to know from the desk of Anne-Marie, right? You're oh so great, Anne-Marie, that's done all these things. We want to hear your perspective. And for me, I've been really clear on like, no. This isn't about just one person's perspective. That's how we have problems, right? This idea of lone genius that has all the answers does not solve anything, does not suit anybody, only makes things worse. And so for me, it was really important to show and document people like Glenn Boddington, who was a trained dancer, and I tell her story a couple of times in the book where she was dancing, like that was her thing. She was working in dance collectives, and she wanted to be able to dance with someone at distance, and this was pre-internet. And there were all these experimental things that they were doing that now means that she's a virtual realities expert, and she's now an academic working in tech on this idea of hybrid and virtual realities and things like the metaverse before anyone was working on it. And she's done that as a direct result of being a dancer that wanted to be in two places at once. Or whether there's the story of someone like Jenny Griffiths, who solved that problem of when you see someone on the tube or on the train and you're like, oh my goodness, I love your jumper, where'd you get it from? She's got a software that you can take a picture of the jumper and then you can find it on the high street. And it's incredible to see that, that was the problem she was solving. But now the use cases of that are so broad that, now that when you go through the airport, it might be her technology that's actually trying to analyze, not just is this a gun shape, but are these elements of what could be reassembled to be a gun, right? That as you're going through security. So there's people like that, or there's folks like Abadesi Osinsade, who runs Hustle Crew, who you should definitely, if you haven't already had her on the pod, you should have her on the podcast. But someone like that who's been able to see a problem, arrange people around it, and come up with concepts like the belonging check, which is one of the kind of activities towards the end of one of the chapters, of this idea of like understanding your privilege, being able to recognize and own the space that you're in, and then to say, a bit like we apply a spell check to all our documents, how can we apply a belonging check to all our interactions with folks and the way that we work and the way that we make decisions across our lives? So lots of really interesting, incredible people. No one that I would say is my favorite.
Oh, no, amazing. Well, I think, whetted everyone's appetite to go get the book and learn more of those stories. They're incredible. And yes, Abadesi, we're definitely going to get on the podcast. I think that's something we'll get straight onto, because I've heard amazing things about the Hustle Crew. If kind of your readers take one message away from the book, like, what would you like it to be and why?
So for me, I think I'd want it to be that this tech thing, right, is for everyone, and everyone actually needs to have some sort of understanding and literacy of it, the same way as most people, everyone in an English-speaking country needs to understand English, and anyone in a Spanish-speaking country needs to understand Spanish. But I think the upshot of that is that it's bit by bit. And I think it's something that people have kind of fed back and have tweeted and have kind of said to me when they've spoken to me, is like, this is just a journey. Like it's not the fountain of all knowledge. It's not that I want to be the expert and know all of the things at the end, but it's a bit by bit, just exploring. And it's taken the pressure off, I think, a lot of folks who feel like, yeah, like you're trying to catch up with someone having done their GCSEs at 10. And that's like now what we're trying to race towards. And, maybe it's too late for you. It's like, no. This is like, what does the tech mean to you? What's the exploration that you want to go on? And just being on that journey is what's important, rather than having the ultimate answers ready to go.
Love that. Yeah, awesome. No, thank you very much for sharing. And I know that you're not a first-time author. I know this is a two-time book deal, but you have actually already written a book before, How to Be a Maths Whiz, which was for children, which I feel I must go out and buy for my daughter. She's definitely keen and interested, I think. So I think anything like that, I think she'd really, really enjoy. But how was that experience compared to this time around? And yeah, but it'd be good to understand, like, what made you feel compelled to write that in the first instance, and how have the two experiences differed?
Very different. I mean, that was with Dorling Kindersley, and which is like a big OG like book publisher. Everyone had those books when they were kids, and there's got a really like clear format. So that was exciting for a whole nother set of reasons. But I think there were a lot of similarities, but big difference. I think with that, the scope was much smaller. I think we knew like there is a curriculum already for numeracy at primary. There were topics already we knew we needed to be able to cover in this, and with that, there was a lot more focus much more focus actually on the activities. But again, that's a similarity because I have activities in every chapter in She's in Control, whereas there's an activity on every page in How to Be a Maths Whiz, almost every page. So I think that would be the biggest difference. But also, yeah, that was more of a multi-stage process because I had to define the activities, and then there was a lot of photography that was involved in that book too, before it then coming out. But that was also, released during post-pandemic. So I think a lot of similarities, but biggest difference was definitely the audience and then the process. But the response has been really cool to that as well. I mean, people like trying things out and seeing that it's things that they can do, which I think when you think about maths, when you think about tech, often that's not the experience that they have, or that's not the assumption they have coming into it. So it's been quite nice to be able to liberate folks on both book projects.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess linked to the book or the content, you mentioned it earlier, you've been on countdown since we last spoke. How was that experience? And I know you're a very busy person, and so this is another thing to add to the list. What made you feel compelled to do that? And how has that been helpful for the broader Anne-Marie mission?
So I only did that because I didn't ask enough questions. And I was like, yeah, this will be different. This is new. I'll give this a go. I mean, yeah, I'll give this a go. But yeah, I mean, it was really intense. 5 episodes a day, 3 days on the trot up in Manchester, kind of back to back. So I would just disappear from the team. I mean, a bit like the book, like I said, would just disappear for a couple of days to just go and film this thing. We finished filming all the episodes before the first one was broadcast, which again was a very surreal experience, actually. Like, it's like, yeah, I was that person months ago, and now we're a whole new year. And I think for me, it was an interesting one because it's an institution, for anyone that hasn't seen it, it just celebrated its 40th anniversary, and it was the first show on Channel 4 when Channel 4 launched, and it's still running, and is the longest running game show in the world that's still on now. And I mean, of all time, in fact, not just that's still on, but I think it was a real great opportunity to be that visible young Black woman, doing the mathematics in a world where a lot of folks have never seen a Black woman do maths. And I think that was something that was seen in the response. Some might call it backlash, some might call it response of, people almost having it and not realizing that they've got an allergy or that this was the first time they'd ever seen a Black woman do maths and had never considered what that might look like. And the fact that, I didn't wear heels, I wore my trainers, I had my big grey hair, still me, I say H, not H, so there were a lot of fun things that kind of to explore in being on a platform like that. I'm glad I did it, and also it's definitely Rachel's job. Like I'm not taking Rachel's job anytime soon.
Yeah.
Anytime at all, actually.
Yeah. Well, it was great to see you on it, and I think it is an institution, but sometimes you do see the same old faces on TV, and I think seeing yours on there in a show that is loved by many generations is an important thing to do. And I appreciate it sounded very, very intense, and you have a lot of other things to do, so I appreciate it's kind of maybe a short-term thing, a one-off, but important all the same.
Exactly.
Before we wrap up, Anne-Marie, you've obviously you've had such a great impact through the work you've done at Stemettes over the last 10 years. You've exposed more than 50,000 girls in Europe to your vision for a more diverse and balanced STEM community. What next is on the horizon for Stemettes, and what are you most looking forward to in 2022?
So 2023 is our 10-year anniversary, and so there's lots of things that are planned across the year to celebrate and commemorate a decade of work, a decade of influence, a decade of impact, but also maybe, looking forward to another decade, probably max, hopefully, of more of that, and then solving this problem, or at least elements of this problem, kind of once and for all. So, we've got a new podcast we've just launched called Stemettes Say What, that will feature quite heavily across the year, that folks can kind of find on all good podcast platforms as well. But also, I think it's going to be really cool to see some of the policy work that we end up doing and advocacy work that we end up doing to kind of affect systemic change. I think there's a lot that we've learned in how we do what we do that is new knowledge. There's a lot in terms of equitable practice that we've been exploring with the Institute of Education. But, there's a couple of campaigns, a couple of things we've got up our sleeves for this kind of big 10-year, big bang, so that we can change things wholesale, change things at a systems level, so that something like Stemettes doesn't need to exist and we can work towards that redundancy. So, look out for festivals, look out for roundtables, look out for a couple of campaigns as well on things like the curriculum and some of the norms that we've got that really do hold our young people and our young women back. And good podcast apps, like lots of different things will be popping up in lots of different places as well, across the UK and across the world. So look out for that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll be very much from the sidelines cheering you on and supporting in any way we can. Very excited. It sounds like lots more in store for Stemettes in the years ahead, and you are making such a big impact, and anything we can do to help, we would love to. So, Anne-Marie, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast, sharing a bit more about She's in Control and what you've got coming up in the year ahead. It's always a great pleasure seeing you, and I hope our listeners will run out and get your book and continue to support the work you're doing at Stemettes too.
Awesome. Thanks very much for having me, folks.